deal with the timing here. Why today? Why did the parents choose today to go to the preserve?
Well, it is my understanding that the preserve was only open to the public as of yesterday. So my clients reached out to me and informed me that they wanted to go into the preserve this morning, and I thought it would be wise to notify law enforcement of their intentions. I did so by text to my contact in the Northport Police Department, and they responded with thank you for the heads up, and then they met my clients there this morning.
Why did they meet your clients there?
Well, I presume they thought it would be a good idea just to accompany them in. They knew the press had been following my clients for weeks and weeks on end, and you'd have to ask them why they chose to come. They did not indicate to me last night that they would be there. They just, again, thanked me for the heads up.
One quick question sideways, and then I want you to take me through what you understand of how the discovery was made. Why didn't the parents ask to go sooner during all these agonizing weeks?
Well, the parents had assumed that the experts, the FBI, and all the tracking teams that they had would be able to locate Brian based upon the information that we had provided them to the specific areas and trails in the park that Brian liked to visit. The park had been closed to the public. There was really no other reason for the Laundries to go search anywhere else.
Now, let's deal with the specifics of today. Is the area that they were searching when these discoveries were made, is this a new area that the parents hadn't informed authorities about before?
No, not at all. Indeed, this is the very area of the park that we initially informed law enforcement on, I believe it was September 17th, that Brian would be most likely in the preserve in this particular area, as I know it, near the bridge. I think it's the bridge that might connect the Myakkahatchee Environmental Park with the Carlton Reserve.
Was this a very deep way or distance into the preserve?
No, Mr. Laundrie informed me that it was quite near the entrance. He didn't put an exact distance on it. He put a time frame of about 30 minutes in, but I would guess it could be a mile or two into the preserve.
So can you help us understand how an area that the authorities were told about, you say, by the parents that isn't even that deep into the preserve, wasn't located all these weeks with all the dogs and the teams and everything else until the parents showed up?
Well, listen, the explanation that the FBI gave today certainly makes sense. If that area was underwater, one can certainly understand why you might not have been able to find the items that were located today. If that water had cleared, 2 weeks ago, perhaps could have circled back and looked again. Perhaps they meant to. Perhaps they were further deeper into the park and never got back to this park because it is so near the entrance. Chris and Roberta went to this area first, and as happenstance was, they stumbled upon these items.
All right, now the key understanding. What do you know from your clients about how the discovery was made? What was going on? What did they tell you about how it happened?
So fortunately, one of your rival news people were there with a camera. And I say fortunately because, some people don't believe how the events laid out today. But Chris and Roberta walked into the preserve. It is my understanding that they were followed closely by the two law enforcement personnel. And when I say closely, certainly within eye shot. And as they went further in, Chris ventured off the trail into the woods. He was zigzagging in different areas. Law enforcement was doing the same thing. And Roberta Laundrie was walking down the trail. And I believe that is on some video to some other news outlet. At some point, Chris locates what's called a dry bag. The dry bag is a white bag, is laying in the woods, I'll say 20 feet or so off the trail. According to Chris, it was in some bramble. Chris didn't want to pick the bag up because he wanted the law enforcement to see it. This was caught on camera. Chris couldn't find the law enforcement because they were then out of sight because Chris had been in the woods. So he didn't want to leave the bag there with the news reporter standing nearby. So he picked it up. He did meet up shortly with law enforcement. They looked at the contents of the bag. At that time, law enforcement officers showed him a picture on the phone of a backpack that law enforcement had located also nearby and also some distance off the trail. At that point, the Laundries were notified that there was also remains near the backpack, and they were asked to leave the preserve.
What do you make of the suggestion that Mr. Laundrie planted the bag and the backpack?
In nice terms, it's hogwash.
Would the authorities have known what they walked onto the trail with?
Absolutely. They met them at the gate or somewhere nearby. They walked in with them. And more importantly, Chris, this is what I said. Fortunately for the Laundries, the press was following them in the whole time.
Why wouldn't the dogs have found these remains?
You would have to ask the experts on that. That's not my expertise. If it was underwater, maybe the dogs couldn't, detect the remains underwater. Maybe the dogs were never brought back to that area. I don't know. You'd have to ask someone else that question.
What were your clients' reaction to what happened while they were there?
That also was caught on video, and, it's quite sad. You can imagine as a parent finding your son's belongings alongside some of the remains, and that's got to be heartbreaking, and I can tell you that they are heartbroken.
Do they believe it is their son?
Chris, it's not about belief. I mean, as you said at the onset, the probability is strong that it is Brian's remains, but we're going to wait until the forensic results come in and verify that.
Now, obviously, the family's under a veil of suspicion because of their lack of cooperation from the beginning, optically, in terms of contacting the Petitos, et cetera, and dealing with authorities. The police gave the impression that the family delayed notifying them about Brian Laundrie's disappearance.
Well, you said that they gave the impression. They've come out right and said it, and certain members of the Northport Police Department have said it more than once. And as I've discussed with you once before, let the record be clear. The Laundries reported Brian did not come home the night he went out for the hike. I actually reported that to the FBI personally. On Friday, the 17th, the FBI called me. We didn't call them. They called me and said, we have a tip that Brian was seen in Tampa, and we want to see if he's in the house. After some back and forth, we agreed on a time. At 6:15, Friday the 17th, the FBI was going to come to the house. During that conversation, with agreeing on the time, I said to them, if you got a tip, where did this come from? Because a member of the Northport PD gave a press conference the night before and said, we know where Brian is. He was asked again, do you know where Brian is? He said, we know exactly where Brian is. I immediately called my clients and said, hey, was Brian picked up? Do you know where he is? Because I don't know where he is. How do they know where he is if we don't? And that was on Thursday. On Friday, when the FBI came to the Laundrie residence, we then said, yes, we will fill out a missing persons report. And that got twisted as though the family waited until Friday to report him missing, which is not how it happened.
It's unfair. It's unfair in the micro, but it's understandable in the macro, because it just doesn't look right that the parents haven't wanted to cooperate, that Brian didn't want to cooperate, that they wouldn't want to talk to the other family. So you can understand why people would be suspicious about their actions.
Absolutely. And, now's not the right time to talk about, the situation with Gabby, but the family was following my directions. I told them not to talk to anybody, not to say a word. I was the intermediary between the family and law enforcement. And that's why we're confident that, law enforcement, specifically the FBI, was informed. Brian did not come home that night. Whatever played out in those 3 days after that, that's on the police and the FBI. That's not on the family. As I heard